Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for watching. I live in Portland, Oregon. I've lived here practically my whole life. This city is my home, and so the idea that an ideology could permeate through a vastly diverse group of people seems unbelievable to me. And yet I see it so often that I have to believe it because it's already happened. The city has become a political bubble. This, of course, doesn't mean everyone agrees with the widely accepted political views that are accepted by most people living here, but expressing dissent can often be difficult when you know so many people around you probably don't agree with what you have to say, and furthermore, probably don't care. The ideology I'm referring to is progressivism, which I myself am not really opposed to in principle. I think we need to create a stronger middle class, have equality for all, fix our prison systems, provide affordable healthcare and education for anyone willing to work hard and learn. But progressivism has become more than just economic progress. It has, in its modern form, embraced identity politics. This way of thinking is regressive and leads to more tribalism and groupthink, and most of all, it allows arguments like those by the alt-right to flourish. This is because it frames the argument for them. The ethno-nationalists think people of different races can't get along, and so must be separated, but identity politics already bunches us up nicely into these boxes. So every time regressives jump down someone's throat for things like cultural appropriation, the other side sees that and thinks, look, another example of races not getting along. Both sides are missing the point, and misguided in my opinion, because racial differences seem to only be skin deep and not indicators of how one thinks. I'm not a scientist, but I would guess that it has something to do with the fact that many of our brains' functions evolved long before we were actually humans. Thus, all people share many of the same processes that produce how we think, and as far as we can tell, the differences from that point on are caused by a combination of genetics and environment. Or at least that's what Steven Pinker argues in his book, The Blank Slate. So, two adopted children may have very similar thoughts and behaviors because of their upbringing, even though they may be of different races, and at the same time, siblings raised by different parents can be very different because of their upbringing, while still having some similarities regardless of how they were raised due to their genes. I seem to be in the minority of thinking about race this way, but I'm not sure that's because self-identified progressives have rejected my view of race, or just that racial conversations aren't really happening, so most people haven't really clearly thought about it. Either way, it leaves us with a serious problem in this city. The first issue is that a taco or burrito truck named Kooks shut down last month due to claims of cultural appropriation. In my previous video, I specifically mentioned that no one owns the concept of tacos, but that fact didn't occur to many who were outraged that two white women spent a small amount of time in Mexico and then decided to start a business. The main accusation being that they were taking away opportunities from Mexican Americans. But these two women started the business and worked in the truck themselves. So if they hadn't started the business, there wouldn't have been any more or less jobs. Well, actually, these two might have just got other jobs, and therefore there would actually be two less jobs available in the city. And no one stopped anyone else from starting a taco truck. But not only that, what's with the assumption that Mexican Americans are good at making or even want to make tacos? I'm sure there are plenty of Latinos who are great at making food, but just like all groups, there are probably some who are terrible at cooking and don't want to do it. So the idea that society should just hand them jobs as taco cooks seems just a little overly presumptuous to me, but seems right on par with what the alt-right wants. All tacos being made by Latinos, Asian food being made by Asians, and so on, seems to me to be the first step in racial segregation. But this wasn't all that happened in Portland lately. Sometimes the only voices we hear are the loudest, and often that means the most outraged. So Kooks doesn't show the full extent to which this political bubble encompasses the city. So for that, we turn to the mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler. Last month, Wheeler urged federal officials to revoke the permit of a group who was planning a protest. The protest, being a right-wing protest, has been immediately criticized by the left as being far-right and extremist. If you want to see for yourself, I suggest you go check out Tim Pool's coverage of the event. Tim is an independent journalist who used to work for Vice News. I think he did a good job of speaking to both the protest and counter-protest sides and being more fair and balanced than pretty much anything out of the mainstream media lately. Regardless of all that, the timing of these protests was terrible. Recently, two men were murdered. Well, the trial hasn't happened, so I guess I should say allegedly, but it's not like the suspect is denying the claims or anything. But for legal reasons, I guess I should use my words carefully. So anyways, allegedly, two men were murdered and the third brutally attacked with a knife and managed to survive. The victims were coming to the aid of two young women being yelled at by the suspect. And so, this tragedy having taken place, many were upset by the protests, as well as a protest that's being set for today, which has been promoted as a march against Sharia and for human rights. But of course, the protesters themselves don't see it that way. Their protest was already planned, so it's not like conservatives decided to make a statement about the attack. They just didn't want to cancel their event simply because a lunatic with a knife went crazy shortly beforehand. And regardless of my own feelings on the topic, there is a far more important point to be made about government limiting free speech, which is why the ACLU decided to make a statement on Twitter. They said, "The government cannot revoke or deny a permit based on the viewpoints of the demonstrators, period. It may be tempting to shut down free speech we disagree with, but once we allow the government to decide what we can say, see, or hear, or who we can gather with, history shows us that the most marginalized will be disproportionately censored and punished for unpopular speech." This idea that we should shut down opposing opinions because they involve hate is misguided, because we'll never defeat hate by suppressing it. So the only way to stop hate groups is to show them that their hate is misguided, either through dialogue or by leading by example. But a far bigger point is, how will we know these groups are legitimate hate groups until we have actually listened to what they have to say? After all, someone might call me hateful for not understanding the oppression of cultural appropriation, while some might call those who make claims of cultural appropriation hateful, as it seems to be based on the idea that some people need handouts. I don't think either side is actually based on hate in this example, but it shows how a lack of understanding about opposing viewpoints can lead us to think less of the other side, which at its extreme can cause us to villainize ordinary people who just prioritize different values than us. And I think ultimately this is why it's important that we talk to people with different views than us and don't jump to conclusions about people and their beliefs. But now I want to turn things around a bit and discuss an equally troublesome political bubble in Oregon. And that is, aside from the regressive bubble plaguing Portland, much of the rest of the state seems to be in a conservative bubble. This fact showing true in a recent event involving faith-healing parents. A church in Oregon City preaches faith healing involving using oils and prayer rather than medicine to heal, which, if an adult chooses not to get the help they need, well, that's their own choice. But it becomes a different matter when children are involved. Earlier this month, a couple was charged with murder after giving birth to twins, and one of the newborns died just hours after birth. And the story is almost as frustrating as it is heartbreaking, because while I think that relying on prayer to heal is extremely stupid, at least on some level it's not that crazy. If you actually believe in an all-powerful God, then the idea that he will heal you isn't that ridiculous in principle. That is, until you realize that God has never healed amputees, which means maybe all those people who prayed and got better might have just gotten better for other reasons. And of course, there's always the question of why not just do both? Pray all you want, but also get the medical help if needed. But regardless of the efficacy of prayer, this couple of all people should have known better, and that is because this same thing happened to other members of the church just 6 years ago. And not just any church members, but the woman's own sister. That's right, in 2011, a couple was charged with the death of their infant for not getting proper medical care, and now, 6 years later, the sister of that woman did the same thing. So how do we escape these bubbles and see the world without the lens of blinding ideologies? Well, I once would have said the answer is the internet, but it seems that algorithms that focus on giving us the content we want just serve to have us confirm our own biases. Mix that with the polarization of the media, and it becomes clear that we have a big problem on our hands. And I don't have an answer on how to fix it, but I think a good first step is to question our sources, seek out information that disagrees with our own views, and be open to evidence. It may not help others escape their own bubble, but at least we can know that we did all we could to seek the truth and not let our own opinions cloud our judgment. So let me know about your experience with political bubbles. Is the rest of the world just as polarized, or is this a bigger problem in Oregon than in other places? You can also rate this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and you can also follow me on social media. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.